2, 3, 4.
Hi everyone, this is Jewish Talk, coming to you from NASA Community College on 19.3 WHPC, also streaming on the iHeart and the iTunes app. This program is later archived on Spreaker.com. So hi there, my name is Rabbi Perl. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. This all depends on when you are listening or tuning in. First, I'd like to discuss the current events. What is the connection between COVID-19 and the terrible events surrounding the murder of George Floyd? Both are connected to the cutting off of air. Air is the most important physical substance in the preservation of human life. Without food and drink, a person can live a number of days. Air, on the other hand, is required constantly. The deep symbolic significance of the knee of a person who is a representative of the USA cutting off the air of a citizen is not just the denial of life itself, but also demonstrates a gross disregard and attack on the basic human right expressed so beautifully by Emma Lazarus on the entrance to the USA. Remember those words? To breathe free. The cry of "I can't breathe" has given voice to the fears and the frustration of millions of people in the USA and around the world who feel suffocated and claustrophobic at the denial of their basic human rights and dignity, to be treated as a people created in the image of God and to be able to breathe free. At this time of mighty upheaval and the beginning of a new post-COVID-19 era, ladies and gentlemen, we must stand by one another and with one another to ensure that every person, without exception, should be able to breathe free. Allow me to continue on this same theme, because George Floyd and the healing of America has to be underscored. They are us and we are one. And let me explain. Clearly, we're all outraged. Is there any decent human being who has seen the video of George Floyd's life being taken from him, who has heard his unanswered whispers for help, "I can't breathe," and is not outraged? It's not possible. What I say is, let us breathe. Let us breathe. We are outraged because the very weight of authority tasked with protecting life was instead applied to crush the life force from a living human being. So we are outraged because as George Floyd's breath was rubbed away, something essential to all of us was lost, the breath of divine that renders every life sacred. Most painful and fatal will be to believe that we are helpless before ourselves, that we are incapable of uprooting racism for good. And I say again, let us breathe, let us breathe. So America needs healing. When there's a rift in a living body between one limb and the other, do not tell the limb that it must heal itself. Speak to the body that must pull itself back together. America can only heal herself by her people joining together as one, by learning to see one another as we have never seen one another before. When it hurts, we scream. But how and to where do we channel that scream? Sure, we have the right and the efficiency of civil protest, which is so fundamental to American society. But we, the outraged, the pained, must realize that wanton destruction is not the path to transformation. For one who destroys his world destroys himself. So wrecking a grandmother's grocery store or ruining the businesses that are central to all of our livelihoods cannot bring America lasting good. So if violence is not the answer, if so many have lost their ability to see anyone who votes or thinks differently than themselves as fellow human beings entitled to their own perspectives, but as deadly enemies in a very uncivil war, is there any way left out of this? Can we get out of this quagmire? Again, I say, let us breathe. Let us breathe. You may have also seen the video going around of the Chabad Rebbe, Rabbi Schneerson, way back, speaking with Mayor David Dinkins. This was in the aftermath of the Crown Rights riots of 1991. That's the one in which the Rebbe insists, as he spoke to the mayor, the two sides are one side. We are one people, united in one city. As long as we continue to speak a dialectic of us and them, we perpetuate the divisions between us by penetrating and perpetuating an illusion that we are not one. Therefore, we must begin to feel that this entity that we call they is really us. We are them. We can recognize that we all share the same life-giving breath of the one Creator. And it's precisely out of the magnificence of our diversity that the image of the one has no image is really revealed to all of us. Again, I say this mantra, let us breathe, let us breathe. We are humanity, united by our divine image. We are America, guided by our ideals. So our diversity is not an obstruction to our unity, but it's really a formula to be celebrated for the strength, the beauty, and the wealth it gives all of us. If we speak, think, and act as one, we can change the course of history forever and for the better. So again, I say, we are one. We must grieve together, and now let us build a new reality together. Let us breathe. Let us breathe. With this in mind, I want to share with you a spiritual thought of the concept of developing a good eye, and really has a broader insight to our current affairs as well. I want to share with you, the Talmud tells us of a great Talmudic sage and leader, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. And he once sent his students out to the world to discover the best advice for living a righteous and fulfilling life. So one of his students, Rabbi Eliezer, the son of Hyrcanus, comes back from his travels and reports. He says, you know what? I have searched and I found that the best advice is to develop an ayin tov, which translates a good heart. It means a good eye, an ayin tov, a good eye. You see, when your eye, your lens on life, is good, what you see will likely be good as well. As the saying goes, what we see depends on what we look at. There's an interesting Facebook post I saw from an organization called the Humans of New York, and it showed a photo of two doctors sitting on a park bench. And the caption on this photo said, "We're eye doctors." What's something about the eye that most people don't realize? The eye doesn't see. The brain sees. The eye just transmits. So what we see isn't only determined by what comes through the eyes. What we see is affected by our memories, our feelings, and by what we've seen before. In other words, what we see is directly affected by our default lens or bias, for better and for worse. Therefore, it is of paramount importance to work on developing the capacity to see God and the good in all. This is the essence of a good eye, and the foundation of this, what I call interpersonal positivity bias that we must all have. See, when we view the world in such a way, we will tend to find positive interpretations of events and experiences, as well as, guess what? Dirty word. We will be able to judge others in the most favorable light. Every human being possesses this capacity for a redemptive vision. But achieving it and maintaining it, guess what? Takes effort. While we may find it feasible to see the good in someone neutral, how do we recast and redeem someone who's made their negative pretensions or their intolerance clear. So I want to share with you today a story from the Lubavitcher Rebbe, who looks past the outer appearances or expressions of negativity in order to connect with the spiritual integrity and the potential hiding within a person, a situation, whatever it may be. And I also want to bring this in, share with you of how to bring this, so to speak, into practice, how to make it part of our life. Let's think of someone in our lives whom we are having a hard time with. What else is new? Now, how are we acting? The person there is bothering you, disturbing you. Now, what are you supposed to do? What is a possible reason they may be acting out in the way that they are? In other words, you see someone who's very difficult, but take the whole picture. Why are they acting that way? Are we able to see past the facade of arrogance of that person, perhaps, or self-absorption, and be able to look into their wholesome essence that may need to be nurtured and offered tender care? Remember, this is something that I try to live with. If you change the way you look at people, the people you look at change. I've seen this many times. I'm going to share with a story that goes back to the 60s. This individual, his name was Yale Butler. He was the son of one of a leading family in Pittsburgh at that time. And he had developed a personal relationship with a local Chabad rabbi, Rabbi Yossi Spielman. Now this young Yale, his name is Yale, was an individualist, a very creative one as well. And in 7th grade, he became the editor of the school newspaper. Okay, so far, so good. Now he wanted to make, in his first edition, he wanted to make an impact in the entire Pittsburgh community. So he thought of a spoof. Now, understand that one of the more active figures in the Pittsburgh Jewish community was a Lubavitcher, who often wore an army hat and jacket. That was his thing. Now, this, with his untrimmed beard, reminded everybody that this Lubavitcher rabbi looked like Fidel Castro, right? We're talking back in the 60s. In fact, the association was so common that this Chabad rabbi was called Castro throughout the community. Now, we all know that the real Fidel Castro's totalitarian, anti-American policies in the 60s were not widely known at that time. Yale decided, this young 7th grader, to expand on this and put up a caricature with a visual association between the rabbi and the revolutionary dictator. And he wrote a fictional kind of account about an invasion of Cuba in which Castro's troops were in danger of being wiped out. In desperation, remember this was a spoof, Castro calls for his brethren in 770. They contacted the Rebbe and the order was given. The Hasidim were to march on Brooklyn Navy Yard, commandeer several submarines, and sail to Castro's rescue. Remember, this was way before all the tumult. Now, let me tell you, Yale's story did attract much attention, but really not the intention or the attention that he looked for. Many read his article, and very few people approved it. Even as a joke, as a jest, it was simply out of place. So the leaders of the traditional establishment at that time reprimanded this 12-year-old for his lack of sensitivity, and he encouraged him to apologize to the Lubavitcher community. Guess what? The first issue of the newspaper was his final one. Now, Rabbi Spielman, however, a local Chabad rabbi there, did not reprimand him. What did he do? What did he suggest? You go and meet the Rebbe. Now, Yale was willing, and Rabbi Spielman arranged for a private audience. So one Sunday evening, Yale and Rabbi Spielman enters the Rebbe's room. The Rebbe motions for Yale to sit down. Right, we're talking about a 7th grader. As he did, he noticed that Rabbi Spielman left. At this point, he began to feel nervous. Can you imagine a 7th grader sitting alone with the Rebbe? And the Rebbe spoke to Yale warmly, telling him that he knew of his family and their work on behalf of the Jewish community in Pittsburgh. Yale was moved. The Rebbe continued complimenting Yale for his talent as a writer. Up until this point, Yale had been mesmerized by the Rebbe's eyes, but then he noticed, to his terror, a copy of his article on the Rebbe's desk. The Rebbe, however, made no mention of the article. He spoke of a person's obligation to see his talents as a trust, meant to be used for the benefit of others. In particular, the Rebbe emphasized, a writer should use his or her abilities to promote unity and love for one another. So Yale, the 7th grader now, he started to relax. And his feelings of fear turned into feelings of empowerment. Instead of reproaching him for his disrespectful story, the Rebbe had recognized his potential, encouraged him to develop it, and gave him a positive and productive focus for the future. I'm now going to go fast forward. In 1982, Yale had become a rabbi and also the publisher of a newspaper. It was called the B'nai B'rith Messenger. Maybe you remember it. In the newspaper, he used the talks of the Rebbe for the weekly Torah portion, column that was there. One night, as he was reviewing the list of people who had purchased lifetime subscriptions, he came across the name of Rabbi Schneerson. He had been sending the Rebbe a paper each week without charge. The Rebbe, however, had felt the need to subscribe on his own accord and to pay for it with a personal check. Years later, the Rebbe remarked in a conversation that Yale, now had become Rabbi Butler, had shown unique skill as a writer since childhood. The Rebbe's positivity bias allowed him to see through the veneer of a typical youthful chaos and rebellion into the boundless potential for spiritual accomplishment, only waiting to be identified and activated. Amazing. And I believe too, as well, what we're seeing across the world is similar to what we saw in the 60s. Yes, there's terrible, still racism out there, but the response by so many backgrounds and affiliation proves there's something underneath that yearning to come out. There's a positivity that all of us want to bring out in a positive way. And we just have to encourage the young people, encourage ourselves to look and to encourage and to erect. And there's so much to be accomplished that's only being just like waiting underneath the surface to be identified and activated. Going into another little subject, so much serious stuff today. This past week, that is last, it was last Wednesday, we had a very special Zoom concert. It was called a concert in quarantine. All of us needed a break. We've all been tumbling going, with the COVID-19 and now with this stuff going on. So we decided to have a little less relaxed, less formal, a more relaxed kind of concert on Zoom. It was beautiful. And prior to the concert itself, led by Tzvi Lampert, I had the opportunity to discuss music, Jewish music. And I want to share with you some aspects of that, because we all need music these days. We need to loosen up a little bit, and dance and bring out some joy in our lives. Music has far more power than most of us realize. I'm sure you've noticed how profound an effect music can have on our moods. In truth, it reaches even deeper. Every existence is two-dimensional. It contains a holy side and an unholy side. The truth of all creations, including those of music. Just as music can be composed and sung by holy people for holy intentions, music can also be composed by unholy in an unholy way, an unholy people, who, while putting in their essence into a composition, are actually imbuing the song with the lowest levels of animalistic and selfishness. So just as a holy melody has the power to connect the listener with the essence of the composer, so too an unholy song has the power to draw the listener down to a very, very low level. So if the content of a song is either heretical, immodest, or in some way negates Jewish values, let me tell you, in Jewish law, it may not be listened to. On a more Kabbalistic plane, the fifth Lubavitcher Rebbe explains that a composer of music invests his or her very self into the work. The music is an expression of the composer's soul, and listening to music connects the listener's soul to that of the composer. So in light of this, do we really want to give ourselves a soul connection to just anyone? Especially if the composer is an individual whose spirituality and values are suspect at best. Now, there's another interesting point about listening to all kinds of music. One has to be very considerate and thoughtful. You see, following the destruction of the Holy Temple in Jerusalem, listening to music was prohibited as a sign of mourning. It only became permissible again due to its profound ability to inspire people in their service of God. That ultimately the purpose of music has a higher reason. And if it imbues a person with greater connection to God and holiness, that's fine, and it's allowed. But simply music that has very, very shallow thought or composition is something we keep away from. The truth is, you see, music is a reflection of the soul in so many different ways. It's so powerful, as we all know, that in times gone by, it would inspire prophecy. The prophets would get into a transcending mood by listening to music. In Kabbalah, in Jewish mysticism, the Hebrew word for music is zemer, which also relates to the word to cut, because music helps banish negative thoughts and clears the mind. So we want to clear it with proper holy music. It cuts away the husk of impurity that sometimes envelops our souls and allows us to connect with the true source of good. And I share with you the words of Rabbi Shneir Zalman, the first Chabad Rebbe, because in the Chabad philosophy and literature, music plays an important role. Song, music. One of the earlier Chabad Rebbes had in his court, in his environment, in his synagogue, a cappella group, literally a group of persons who would sing a cappella. It was called a capella. It was not just singing for the sake of singing. There was a focus of depth of what music and song should be all about. So this is what he says. If the first Chabad Rebbe, this is, if words are the pen of the heart, the song is the pen of the soul. The soul's pen, however, writes in the opposite direction from the heart's. See, while words carry meaning downwards from God's own consciousness, so to speak, God speaks to us, it enters into the minds of ourselves, of the sages, into the prophets, and inscribes God's words into our hearts. The song carries the soul upwards to be absorbed in the high infinite light. So there's two sides. Words come to us. Song represents our return journey to Hashem. That is why nigunim, particular songs or tunes that have no words, are unbelievable. You see, those words limit and define, but a nigun without words tears the soul beyond all bounds, beyond the words. The previous Lubavitcher Rebbe, known as the Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak of Lubavitch, he put it this way: a nigun, a song, opens the windows of the soul. First, there must be a deep contemplation, focusing the mind upon the oneness of Hashem, to see the unity within each thing and each person, till it becomes real and you sense it in a real way. But sometimes when you're thinking that way and focusing that way, it remains frozen in some cold intellect. With a nigun, with a song, that allows the soul to pour out. Allows the soul to pour blessings into one's mind, and from one's mind into one's heart and into one's actions. So meditation can actually, you could say, enlighten our intellect. But the nigun, that, my friends, uplifts us and transforms us in our total being. And going back to the world that we're living in today, it can be tough. We thought we were coming out of the COVID-19 and moving back into some normal. But look what we're facing right now. But in the long term, my friends, good things will come. We just have to apply song. Just like when we read the Torah in the synagogue, the person reading the Torah has to sing it. And he looks at the letters that have no vowels, no music, indications. A person has to apply looking at the words, but also learn how to look at the world around us. The world around us has no vowels, has no musical notes. In fact, it has the opposite. It seems very sad and very dry and no meaning. What we've learnt in our own lives and from our own source and our own holiness, that if we apply song, we can actually find the vowels, how to read something, how to read deeply into something, and to be able to bring out the depth of divine providence of so many things in our life in so many different ways. And some of the ways to do it, my friends, really is by singing. Sing. You'll find, and there are many stories of people who ask so many questions, and the response was, before the person was given the answer, the person who was asked the question started to sing a very deep song. And then he proceeded to give an answer. But songs relax us, brings us to a different plane. And during this very, very challenging time, my dear friends, I want to thank you, each and every one of you, as we come together each week to learn from each other, to share with each other, to sing with each other. Let us remember that the very definition of a soul in Hebrew, neshama, comes from the same word as neshima, which means to breathe. And as I said earlier on, let us remember the freedom, the appreciation that we must all have. Let us breathe. Let us breathe. Let our souls breathe. Let other people's souls breathe. Let the soul breathe life, new breath into the world that we live in. This is your host wishing you a wonderful week. Thank you again.